Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation on how narrative video games are becoming a new form of children's and young adult literature. My name is Joshua Morris, and the first name of the video games that I will be presenting on are called It Takes Two and What Remains of Edith Finch. And together we'll examine how these games function as literary texts, how they teach emotional and moral lessons through character development, storytelling, and complex themes. Video games are becoming the new literary mode for children and young adults by using storytelling and interactivity and immersion to explore emotional growth, demonstrating empathy and personal identity as seen in the two video games that I'm going to be discussing today. Traditionally, literature has been thought of as either written texts or oral stories that have been told from generation to generation. Today's stories take many more forms than that, thanks to technological advancements in the pre and the post 2000s. Video games, especially the ones that are created with emotional engagement and interactivity in mind, are now acting as literary modes and devices and taking place of the novels and the books that our generations once read. In doing this, they create a space for the reader, or the player in this case, to explore relationships and emotional growth through simulation, being completely immersed in a new dimension. Shirley Reynolds, in a very short introduction to children's literature, says that stories are key images, vocabularies, or attitudes, structures, and explanations we need to contemplate experience. Games like It Takes Two and What Remains of Edith Finch serve that same purpose. They explore ethical dilemmas and identity issues, the loss of loved ones, and empathy. These are all core values and concerns of a young adult reader, and they should be. When reading a book, it's easy to get bored because there's no movement in the words, nothing to keep a young adult's attention span. These two games invite active participation with your fingers to further the story with decisions made by the player that affect it down the road. It Takes Two is a game that is disguised as a cooperative puzzle game that can only be played by two people. It's not solo. This forces cooperation and bonding, collaboration, if you will, between the players as they try to figure out the puzzles and progress to the next puzzle. The reason that it's disguised as this is because the two players in the game world are a couple who are going through a divorce. They're forced to cooperate, and the healing comes from the two of them doing that. This displays a character arc structure in written language, similar to the way that a character arc structure would be in a young adult novel. And it follows the three C's: cooperation, conflict resolution, and character development. These things are all critical to this game. The core themes that are at play in It Takes Two shows emotional growth, the impact on divorce on young children who are in important developmental stages in their life, and the importance of kindness and empathy. Just like young adult novels tend to take on topics that are difficult to talk about, this game doesn't try to hold anything back either. It just does it in a more obscure way. It Takes Two tries to encourage the growth of its players by making the players do things in the game that emulates care, and cooperation is key, or else the players won't progress to the next area. Rose is the daughter of our couple solving the puzzles. She is the center for emotion in this video game. Her outlook on the divorce situation can be seen in little cutscenes that are completely silent. The reason that they're completely silent is symbolic for how she feels, overlooked physically, not heard, and unseen emotionally. This also mirrors the emotions of young Connor O'Malley, if you recall, earlier in the semester from A Monster Calls, who struggled with finding out who he actually was and struggled with not being seen and the emotions that came about from that. Unlike the previous game mode, where it was sort of open world, if you would say, the narrative mode in this game comes from a series of short interactive stories which reveals Edith's childhood upbringing, alone in a castle. Each room in her old house or castle is narrated as a space for memories to be recalled and clues to be given. Each room tells the life and the death of a loved one or a hated family member. The narrative structure is closely resembling a book that explores isolation or personal identity struggles or emotional development in a place where you couldn't develop as a child. Depth of What Remains of Edith Finch is somewhat immense. It deals with concepts of grief, family history, isolation, and fate. It also leaves it up to the player to interpret certain truths from lie and to form their own opinions on certain characters. Facilitating opinion development in a space that has no wrong answers creates a way for young readers to express themselves in a unique fashion rather than to conform to one concrete game ending. The process for which the player gets to that ending is completely up to them. Comparing the two families in these games, they're incredibly different with some similarities. The family in It Takes Two is trying to figure out a way to work things out for the better of their family. Both of the parents are cooperative, and all the members are alive. In Edith Finch, she deals with a family that's already broken, with some pieces that are gone forever, and members that don't want to come back into the family. We follow the protagonist on her journey to piece the puzzle back together, what was once her family. One thing that stays the same throughout both of these games, though, is that the player chooses the ending. The player interprets the information. These two stories line up with classic themes of family loss, the process of trying to renew what has once been lost, and discover true identity, and leaving it up to the player to do this creates freedom in the player or the reader that they wouldn't have in books or novels that have a definite and finite ending. Both of these games use a plethora of different visual metaphors and audio metaphors as well to narrate the game. They do this in order for the player to sufficiently process information about the plot. In It Takes Two, the ways that the puzzle are laid out, each level, represents the emotional state of the game. If it's a cold setting, like in a machinery, there are conflicting emotions. And if it's set in the garden, when soft emotions are needed to be displayed, that's where they'll be displayed, with the sun shining, rather than in a dark place like a machine. In Edith Finch, the way that the art is laid out around the rooms indicates the tone of the narrator or that particular part of the game. It could be wallpaper. It could be the room being dark. It could be certain sounds that come from the room. It could be certain clues like a pen and paper. It could be anything. And it's up to the reader to interpret these before making their next decision in the puzzle. I used to love the Goosebumps books growing up, particularly the ones that let you choose what you wanted to do in certain parts of the book. That corresponded to a different ending at the end of the book. And this was important to me because it made me feel like I was reading 7 or 8 different books, but the only difference was the decisions that I made along the way. And the difference between those books and the other books that are out there are the endings are set in ink and paper. They're finite. Games offer the opportunity to turn players into storytellers themselves. Solving puzzles and going through a death scene raises the stake for players who have invested themselves in the game, and they feel like they've become a part of the story themselves. Being the character is never the same as observing the character. James Paugee argues that the theory of learning in good video games fits better with the modern, high-tech, global world today's children and teenagers live in than they see in school. This makes video games specially suited for teaching young adults and their development, helping them aid in this process. Sasha Barab and his colleagues at Arizona State University say that games provide players the opportunity to determine when to use particular content, and they provide the experience as well as the motivation that players need to critically analyze the consequences of their actions in conceptually revealing ways. In other words, games provide a way for children to make mistakes without real-world consequences and learn from those mistakes through the storytelling and the consequences that are in the game. In this way, video games are basically interactive books with the ability to immerse the reader in a more engaging fashion. The benefits from this will help readers or players in their emotional and moral development at earlier stages. Some games don't always have themes or events that align with the struggles or developmental needs of a young adult. That's just how it is. Call of Duty has little to no value to a 7 or an 8-year-old. On the other hand, It Takes Two and What Remains of Edith Finch have that. They have events and themes that align with the needs of young adults. Things like family issues and loss and personal identity struggle, feelings of being isolated. Similar to how books look at mature ideas and themes with a certain age group in mind, these games display emotionally complex themes that can resonate with young adults, like certain famous book titles resonated with us and our parents. In conclusion, video games like It Takes Two and What Remains of Edith Finch represent a new and evolved literary mode. They share the same kind of goals that children's literature does. They just go about it in a little bit of different way. Their goals are to help the child form their own unique identity, demonstrate empathy, and support emotional development. Except video games do this through interactivity, not imagination, like in books and novels, letting players become part of the narrative themselves. And that's a beautiful thing. This evolution of literary modes challenge the ideas that we once had of what literature is. and it offers another tool for the education of young adults. The world is becoming more and more digital every day, and I think maybe it's time that literature gets more digital too. These are my sources, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a great day.